The candle won't last much longer. Its light dances across these weathered hands, hands that have done terrible things in the name of what I once called justice. The doctor says I've got 3 days, maybe 4. The bullet lodged too deep near my spine to risk digging it out. Poetic, I suppose, that I should die slow from lead after delivering so much of it swift to others. I asked for paper, for a pen. Told him I needed to put my affairs in order. Truth is, there ain't much to sort. No family to speak of. No legacy worth claiming. Just this confession that'll likely burn in the stove once they find my body gone cold. My name is Everett Sloane. For 30 years, folks across the frontier called me the Adjudicator. Newspapers printed tales of my exploits. Dime novels painted me a hero. Children in half a dozen territories played at being me, pointing sticks at each other, falling dramatic in the dust. Even now, they say my name with reverence in saloons from Santa Fe to Dodge City. All of it built on a lie. It was 1869 when I rode into Widow's Creek, just another dusty nowhere between mountains, a town too small to matter but too stubborn to die. One main street, a general store, 2 saloons facing each other like duelists, and a small church that doubled as a schoolhouse. I wasn't planning to stay more than a night, just long enough to rest my horse and move on toward Colorado. That changed the moment I saw her. She was tending a small garden behind the mercantile, dress the color of wheat, hair like burnished copper caught in a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. When she straightened and saw me watching, she didn't startle or look away. Instead, she met my gaze steady, nodded once, and went back to her work. I learned her name was Eleanor Blackwood, widow to James Blackwood, who'd been shot dead the year before by the Keller gang during a robbery. She ran the mercantile alone now. Folks said she was doing just fine without a husband, thank you kindly. That first conversation I can recall every word. Passing through? She'd asked, measuring coffee beans into a paper sack without looking up. Seems that way, I'd answered. Most do. She tied the sack with string, her movements efficient, practiced. That'll be 15 cents. I placed a quarter on the counter. Keep the change. For the first time, she really looked at me, her eyes the color of rain-washed slate. Not beautiful in the way saloon girls painted themselves to be, but striking. Something in her face that spoke of steel beneath the skin. I don't take charity, mister. Not charity, just appreciation for good coffee. You haven't tasted it yet. I smiled. Then I'll come back tomorrow and let you know if I overpaid. She slid a dime back across the counter. I'll expect your honest assessment. It was nothing. A simple exchange between a shopkeeper and a traveler. Yet something in that moment rooted itself in me. By nightfall, I'd taken a room at the boarding house. By week's end, I'd convinced myself I needed rest before continuing my journey. By month's end, I'd stopped pretending I was going anywhere at all. I watched her. Not in a manner meant to frighten. At least, that's what I told myself. I observed her routine. The way she opened the store at dawn. How she treated every customer the same. Whether they were buying a penny's worth of nails or supplies for a month-long cattle drive. The quiet dignity with which she carried her widowhood. Occasionally she smiled. Never at me, but at Mrs. Peterson's young daughter, or old Doc Wallace when he told his tired jokes. Those smiles were rare treasures, and I found myself constructing elaborate scenarios in my mind where I might earn one. I made excuses to visit the mercantile. Bought things I didn't need, tried to engage her in conversation that she tolerated but never encouraged. I convinced myself she was guarded because of her loss, that beneath her reserve was a woman waiting to be rescued from her loneliness. What a goddamn fool I was. The Keller gang returned 3 months after I arrived. 5 men, trail-worn and mean. Their leader, Jonas Keller, a bull of a man with a beard like wire and eyes like empty wells. They'd already robbed 2 farmsteads on the outskirts, killed a rancher who'd resisted. They rode into town at dusk, kicking up dust that turned golden in the setting sun. I was sitting outside the saloon, nursing whiskey, when they dismounted in front of Eleanor's mercantile. I didn't think, just moved, whiskey forgotten, hand already on my Colt as I crossed the street. I'd built some reputation before arriving in Widow's Creek, wasn't wearing a badge anymore, but I'd been a deputy in Missouri and had tracked men across 3 states for bounties. "Store's closed," I called out, voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. Keller turned, took me in with a lazy assessment. "Ain't closed, lights still on." His men spread out slightly, hands hovering near weapons. "It's closed to you." I kept my stance relaxed, but my mind calculated angles, distances, who would draw first among his men. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then the mercantile door opened and Eleanor stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "You killed my husband," she said, voice clear in the evening quiet. "You're not welcome here." Keller's laugh was like stones grinding together. Widow Blackwood, still pretty as I remember. He took a step toward her. "Your husband died stupid. Be a shame if you followed his example." What happened next lives frame by frame in my memory. Keller's hand twitching toward his gun, Eleanor's shotgun rising, my Colt clearing leather, the explosion of gunfire that seemed to stop time itself. When silence fell again, 3 of Keller's men lay dead in the street. Keller himself clutched a bleeding arm, his weapon kicked away from him by my boot. The 5th man had surrendered, hands high, face pale with shock. Eleanor stood unmoved on the porch, shotgun still aimed steady though she hadn't fired. It was my bullets that had found their marks. As the townsfolk emerged from their hiding places, as men came to secure the prisoners and drag away the dead, Eleanor finally lowered her weapon. Her eyes met mine across the bloody dust, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw what I'd been hoping for. Gratitude, admiration, perhaps the beginning of something more. I was wrong, of course, but I wouldn't realize that for years to come. That night changed everything. By morning, I was no longer just another drifter passing through. I was the man who'd saved their town, who'd avenged James Blackwood and brought 2 of his killers to justice. The town council approached me about becoming sheriff. I accepted, pinned on the star, and told myself it was to protect the town, to protect her. The truth was far simpler and infinitely more pathetic. I wanted to be worthy of Eleanor Blackwood. In those early days as sheriff, I'd patrol past the mercantile more often than necessary. Sometimes she'd acknowledge me with a nod. Once, after I'd helped her unload a heavy shipment of goods from the supply wagon, she invited me in for coffee. We sat at her small table in the back room, the store silent around us. "Why did you stay?" she asked plainly. "In Widow's Creek. It's hardly a place men like you settle." "Men like me?" "Men who've seen more of the world than this." She gestured vaguely. "Men with your abilities." I should have been honest then. Could have told her that something about her had drawn me in, that I found myself thinking of her at odd moments of the day. Instead, I said, "Place needs law." Figured I could provide it for a spell. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once as if confirming something to herself. "Well, we're grateful for your service, Sheriff." Service. Like I was performing a duty, nothing more. I told myself she was being cautious, that time would change things between us, that eventually she would see me as something more than the town's protector. The months passed. I kept order in Widow's Creek with efficient justice. Word spread about the new sheriff who'd taken down the Keller gang, and my reputation grew. Men started to avoid trouble when they rode through. Those who didn't learned quickly that I enforced the law without mercy. Every criminal I faced, every threat I eliminated, I saw as an obstacle between Eleanor and safety, between Eleanor and happiness, between Eleanor and me. I began to track men beyond the town limits. Outlaws and thieves who might one day threaten Widow's Creek became my targets. I'd ride out for days, sometimes weeks, returning with bodies slung over saddles or captives bound for trial in larger towns. With each success, my legend grew. Eleanor watched it all with eyes I couldn't read. "You're gone more than you're here these days," she remarked once when I'd returned from a 3-week absence, bringing down a cattle rustler who'd been operating 2 counties over. "Keeping trouble far from town," I explained, hoping she'd hear what I couldn't say, that I was doing it all for her. "And if trouble finds us while you're away?" Her question wasn't accusatory, just practical. "Then I'll hunt it down and make sure it never happens again." She sighed then, a sound so soft I almost missed it. "There's always more trouble, Sheriff. You can't eliminate it all." But I was determined to try. I remember the first time I killed a man specifically because I thought he'd looked at Eleanor wrong. His name was Curtis Daly, a drifter passing through like I'd once been. I'd noticed him lingering outside the mercantile, watching as Eleanor helped customers. Nothing overtly threatening in his manner, but something in his gaze made my skin crawl. Or so I told myself. I confronted him behind the saloon that night, accused him of having designs on the widow's property. He denied it, of course, but there was a smirk on his face that fed the darkness growing inside me. "You planning to stay in town long?" I asked, hand resting casual on my holster. "Might be. Seems like a friendly place." His eyes slid toward the mercantile across the street. Some real hospitable folk. That was all it took. I claimed later that he drew first, that I had no choice. Perhaps he did reach for his gun. Memory has a way of reshaping itself to ease a guilty conscience. What I know for certain is that I wanted him dead the moment I saw him watching her, and I made it happen. The town believed my account without question. My reputation shielded me from scrutiny. Eleanor herself brought me supper the next evening, a quiet gesture of thanks for protecting the town once again. "You didn't have to," I said, surprised to find her on my doorstep, basket in hand. "A sheriff needs to eat." Her expression gave nothing away, especially one who takes his duties so seriously. I searched her face for some sign that she understood what I'd done for her, that she appreciated the lengths I was willing to go. All I found was the same composed dignity she showed everyone. As she turned to leave, I caught her arm gently. "Eleanor." "Mrs. Blackwood," she corrected, not unkindly but firmly. I let my hand fall away. "Mrs. Blackwood, I want you to know that you're safe here. I'll make sure of it." Something flickered across her face then. Not gratitude, as I'd hoped, but something more complex. "No one is ever truly safe, Sheriff Sloan, but I appreciate the sentiment." She left me standing in my doorway, food growing cold in my hands, desire burning hot in my chest. The years passed. My reputation spread beyond the territory. The adjudicator, they called me in newspaper accounts, a man who delivered justice with deadly precision. Wanted posters bore my name. "Alive only. Dead men tell no tales." Bounty hunters sought my guidance. Young lawmen asked for my wisdom. And all the while I orbited Eleanor like a planet around its sun, never drawing closer, never breaking free. I told myself I was being patient, that I was proving my worth through dedication and service, that eventually she would see me as the protector she needed, the man worthy of replacing the husband she'd lost. There were moments that fed this delusion. The Christmas she knitted me a scarf, presented with the simple, "The winters are cold here, Sheriff." The time she tended a knife wound I'd received from a drunk cowboy, her fingers efficient but gentle against my skin. The day she actually laughed at some forgettable comment I'd made while helping her inventory supplies. Each crumb of attention I collected and hoarded, building them into a fantasy that existed only in my mind. Reality was far different. Eleanor was unfailingly polite but maintained her distance. She treated me with the same respect she showed Doc Wallace or Pastor Miller, a valued member of the community, nothing more. If I lingered too long in conversation, she would find some task requiring attention. If I offered assistance beyond what was necessary, she would gently decline. "You do too much already, Sheriff," she would say, those gray eyes meeting mine directly. "The town needs you for more important matters." The town. Never "I need you" or "I want you." Always the town. Still, I persisted. My pursuit of justice became more relentless, my methods more brutal. Men feared crossing into my territory. Some who did never left. I told myself it was necessary, that I was building a safe haven for Eleanor, a place where no harm could ever touch her again. In truth, I was building a monument to my obsession, brick by bloody brick. Spring of 1879. 10 years I'd been in Widow's Creek. 10 years of watching, waiting, protecting. 10 years of deluding myself that someday Eleanor would see me as I wished to be seen. The town had grown. The railroad had come through 2 years prior, bringing new commerce, new faces. I'd expanded my jurisdiction, riding circuit through nearby settlements that couldn't afford their own law. My legend had grown with each passing year, each outlaw brought to justice. I returned from one such circuit to find a stranger's horse hitched outside the mercantile. Nothing unusual in that, travelers pass through regularly now. But something about the fine quality of the saddle, the well-groomed appearance of the animal, set my instincts humming. I entered the store to find Eleanor in conversation with a man I'd never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, with silver threading through dark hair. Not a cowboy or a drifter, but a gentleman of some means. They were laughing. I'd heard Eleanor laugh maybe 3 times in 10 years, and here she was, cheeks flushed with amusement at whatever this stranger had said. They both looked up as the bell above the door announced my entrance. Eleanor's smile dimmed slightly, a detail that cut deeper than any knife. "Sheriff," she greeted me, "welcome back. Allow me to introduce Thomas Mercer. He's our new schoolteacher." Mercer extended his hand, his grip firm and confident. "Sheriff Sloan, your reputation precedes you. It's an honor." I muttered some pleasantry, eyes moving between them, noting the comfortable way they stood near each other, the lingering warmth in Eleanor's expression. "Mr. Mercer arrived last week," Eleanor explained. "The town council finally approved funding for a proper school building. He'll be staying through the summer to oversee construction before classes begin in the fall." "That so?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Where are you staying, Mr. Mercer?" "Mrs. Blackwood has kindly offered me the room above the store until more permanent arrangements can be made." His smile revealed no awareness of the storm his words had unleashed inside me. "She's been an extraordinary help in getting me settled." I looked to Eleanor, searching for some sign that this arrangement was mere practicality, nothing more. What I saw instead was a woman suddenly unable to meet my gaze directly. "The children need education," she said, as if anticipating my unspoken questions. "The council agreed it was a priority." "Of course." I kept my voice even, professional. "Well, I won't keep you from your preparations." I left the store, mounted my horse, and rode hard out of town until the animal was lathered and heaving. Only then did I stop, dismounting to punch a tree until my knuckles split and bled. 10 years. 10 years of service, of protection, of devotion. And she'd given this stranger what she'd never offered me. Proximity, welcome, the space above her store that I'd imagined 100 times might someday be mine. That night, I drank myself into oblivion at the saloon. The next morning, I began watching Thomas Mercer with the same intensity I'd once reserved for threats to the town. Mercer was everything I was not. Educated, cultured, gentle in his mannerisms. The children adored him. The town embraced him. He organized a reading circle, a community picnic, plans for a harvest festival in the fall. And Eleanor bloomed in his presence. I watched it happen with mounting desperation. The way she would touch his arm lightly during conversation. How she began wearing her hair differently, adorned with a simple ribbon. the books they exchanged, heads bent close together as they discussed passages. I told myself he must be hiding something. No man could be so perfect. There had to be secrets, a past he was concealing. I made inquiries, sent telegrams to contacts in other territories. The responses came back frustratingly consistent. Thomas Mercer was exactly who he claimed to be. A schoolteacher from Boston, impeccable references, moved west for the fresh air after a bout of illness. Still, I watched. Waited for him to reveal the darkness I was certain lurked beneath his polished exterior. Instead, I witnessed something far worse. Eleanor falling in love. It wasn't dramatic or overt. Eleanor wasn't a woman given to public displays. But I'd studied her for a decade, learned to read the smallest shifts in her expression. I saw the softening around her eyes when Mercer entered a room, noticed how she found reasons to walk past the schoolhouse construction site, observed the way she straightened her skirts before he came to dinner each evening. Each sign was a knife twisting in my gut. One evening in late summer, I followed them. They'd gone for a walk after supper, a habit they'd developed. Usually, they stayed on the main street, their conversation visible to anyone passing by. But this night they turned down the path toward the creek for which the town was named. I kept my distance, moving through shadow, silent as the predator I'd become. When they reached the bank, they stood close, voices too low for me to hear. Then Mercer took her hand, raised it to his lips in a gesture so gentle it made me want to howl with rage. Eleanor didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, one hand coming to rest against his chest. Even from my hiding place, I could see the moonlight reflected in her eyes as she looked up at him. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. What passed between them in that moment was more intimate than any physical act. A recognition, an acceptance, a promise. I slipped away before they could discover me, returned to my office and methodically cleaned my guns while my mind traveled down dark corridors. The first anonymous letter arrived on Mercer's desk a week later. I disguised my handwriting, used paper from the next town over. Some men aren't what they appear. Ask him about Santa Fe. Mercer had never been to Santa Fe, of course, but the town had recently witnessed a brutal murder, and rumors of a mysterious stranger had circulated in the papers. Nothing concrete, no description that matched Mercer, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. Eleanor brought the note to me that evening, concern etched in her features. Thomas received this today, she said, placing it on my desk. What do you make of it? I studied the note as if seeing it for the first time, then her face. Has he been to Santa Fe? Never. Her certainty irritated me. It's obviously some kind of mistake, or a cruel prank. I'll look into it, I promised, folding the note carefully into my vest pocket. Has he received threats before? She frowned. Why would he? Everyone in town respects him. Everyone has enemies, Mrs. Blackwood. I leaned forward. Even the most seemingly perfect among us. Something in my tone made her step back slightly. I should return. Thomas will be worried. Thomas? Not Mr. Mercer anymore. The familiarity burned. Of course. I rose, the perfect gentleman. Please assure Mr. Mercer that I'll give this matter my full attention. More notes followed over the coming weeks, each more specific, more threatening. I watched their effect ripple through the town, hushed conversations, sideways glances at the schoolteacher. Mercer himself remained composed, but I could see the strain beginning to show around his eyes. Eleanor grew more protective of him, more defiant toward the whispers. She stood closer to him in public, her hand often resting in the crook of his arm, a clear statement to the town about where her loyalties lay. It should have satisfied me, seeing him troubled, watching doubt creep into the community that had embraced him so readily. Instead, her unwavering support for him only deepened my resentment, my conviction that he needed to be removed. The last letter wasn't anonymous. It came from the sheriff's office in Denver, responding to my inquiry about a series of unsolved assaults near a schoolhouse there 2 years prior. The description of the suspect was deliberately vague, enough to raise questions, not enough to confirm innocence. I made sure the letter was seen by several town council members before I investigated further. By evening, rumors were racing through Widow's Creek faster than wildfire. I found Mercer packing his belongings when I entered his room above the store. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Sheriff." He nodded once, continuing to fold a shirt with careful precision. "I assume you've heard I'm leaving." Word travels fast in small towns. I remained by the door, watching him. Some might say you're running. Some might. He placed the shirt in his trunk, then straightened to face me fully. "But you and I both know what's really happening here, don't we?" For a moment, I thought he'd discovered my authorship of the letters. My hand drifted toward my holster. "She deserves better than this town," he continued, misreading my tension. "I've asked her to come with me to San Francisco, to marry me." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. And her response? "She's considering it." His gaze was steady, unafraid. "She has concerns about leaving the business, the life she's built here. But I think, in time, she'll see it's for the best." "You'd take her away from everything she knows?" My voice remained controlled, though rage pounded behind my eyes. "Because of a few rumors?" A man with nothing to hide would stay and fight. "A man who truly cared for her wouldn't ask her to endure the stigma these rumors have created." He took a step toward me. "I wonder, Sheriff, if you've considered who might benefit from my departure, who might have reason to engineer such a campaign." We stood facing each other, the truth hovering unspoken between us. "I've protected this town for over a decade," I said finally. "Protected her. And who will protect her from you?" His words were soft, almost pitying. My hand closed around my revolver, drawing it in one fluid motion. Mercer didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon of his own. He simply watched me with those calm eyes. "If you shoot an unarmed man, a respected teacher, how will you explain it? Even your reputation won't shield you from that." He was right. I knew it even as hatred coursed through me. Slowly, I lowered the gun. "Leave tonight," I said, each word like ground glass in my throat. "Alone. Tell her whatever story you want, but you go alone, or I swear I'll find reason to put you in the ground." Sadness crossed his face. "She was right about you. All these years, she's known exactly what you are." The knowledge that they'd discussed me, that Eleanor had seen through my pretense of nobility, sent a chill through my core. "What did she say?" "That you wear justice like a mask to hide the emptiness beneath." He shook his head. "She pitied you, Sheriff. Never feared you, never hated you, just pitied you." Pity. Of all the emotions I might have stirred in her, pity was the most unbearable. I left without another word, the taste of ash in my mouth. Mercer was gone the next morning, his departure as dignified as his arrival had been. He left a note for Eleanor. I know because I watched from across the street as she read it, her face a mask that revealed nothing of what she felt. She didn't come out of the mercantile that day, or the next. When she finally emerged on the third day, she moved like a woman twice her age, back straight, but something vital dimmed within her. I approached her carefully, hat in hand, the picture of concerned authority. "Mrs. Blackwood, I was sorry to hear about Mr. Mercer's departure." She looked at me then, really looked at me, in a way she hadn't in all our years of acquaintance. What I saw in her eyes wasn't grief or anger, it was knowledge, complete, irrefutable knowledge of what I had done. "Were you?" Her voice was cool, controlled. "I doubt that very much, Sheriff. If there's anything I can do—" "There isn't." She cut me off with a finality that brooked no argument. There never was. She turned away, and in that moment, I understood that whatever fragile connection had existed between us was severed beyond repair. She would never flee Widow's Creek, not because she feared me, but because she refused to be driven from the home she'd made. And I, bound by my own lies and the persona I'd created, could neither follow Mercer to exact revenge nor abandon the town that had become the stage for my delusion. We were trapped together, the widow and her unwanted protector, in a prison of my making. The years that followed blur together in my memory. I continued as sheriff, my reputation growing ever more fearsome. Men crossed counties to avoid my jurisdiction. My name became synonymous with a particular brand of ruthless justice. Eleanor and I existed in the same small town like strangers sharing a cage. She never accused me openly of driving Mercer away, never confronted me about the letters or the rumors. She didn't need to. The truth lay between us, unspoken but acknowledged. She sold the mercantile 5 years later, opened a small lending library instead. I watched from a distance as silver threaded through her copper hair, as fine lines appeared at the corners of her eyes. Still beautiful, still distant as the stars. Sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, I would wonder what might have happened had I simply left her alone. Had I accepted from the beginning that her heart wasn't mine to claim? Would she have found happiness with someone else? With Mercer, perhaps. Would I have found purpose beyond my obsession? But such moments of insight were fleeting. More often, I would convince myself that I'd been right to protect her from Mercer, from any man who might have taken her from Widow's Creek, that my service to the town had been noble, necessary. That lie sustained me through 20 more years of empty victory. It's strange how a life can collapse in an instant, how certainty can shatter like glass against stone. For me, that moment came 3 weeks ago. I was 68 years old, still wearing the star, though my reflexes had slowed and young deputies handled most of the day-to-day work. My legend had grown to mythic proportions. Stories told around campfires, exploits exaggerated beyond recognition. I was sitting on the porch outside the sheriff's office, watching the street as I'd done for 30 years, when I saw her collapse. Eleanor was walking from the library to her small house at the edge of town. One moment upright, the next crumpled in the dust like a discarded dress. I reached her before anyone else, gathered her slight form in arms that suddenly felt too rough for such a burden. "Get the doctor," I bellowed, cradling her against my chest as I carried her toward Doc Wallace's office. Her eyes fluttered open as I kicked the door wide. "Sheriff," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Don't speak," I commanded, laying her gently on the examination table. "Save your strength." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Always. Giving orders. Doc Wallace bustled in, shooed me outside like I was some fretting husband rather than the law in these parts. I paced the boardwalk, hat twisted between my hands, fear a living thing in my chest. Hours passed before the doctor emerged, his face grave in a way that told me everything before he spoke a word. "Her heart," he said simply. "Been weakening for years. She knew it was coming." "She'll recover." The question sounded foolish even to my own ears. Doc Wallace, now stooped and white-haired himself, shook his head. "Days, maybe weeks. Nothing to be done except make her comfortable." I pushed past him, back into the room where Eleanor lay pale against the pillows. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, though her eyes were clear when they met mine. "I'd like to go home," she said, voice stronger than I expected. "To die in my own bed." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. When Doc Wallace had prepared a wagon with blankets and pillows, I lifted her again. This fragile woman who had occupied the center of my existence for 3 decades. As I settled her in the wagon, her hand caught my wrist, surprising in its strength. "Why did you do it?" she asked, eyes searching mine. "All these years, all those men. Was it ever really about justice?" The question stripped me bare. In that moment, all pretense fell away, and I could only answer with truth. No. She nodded once as if confirming what she'd always known. I would never have loved you, she said, not unkindly. Not even if they'd all disappeared. You understand that now, don't you? Yes. The admission felt like bleeding out slowly in the dirt. Good. She released my wrist. Then perhaps there's hope for your soul yet, Everett Sloane. I visited her daily as she faded. Sometimes she was lucid, other times lost in memories I couldn't share. I would sit beside her bed, this man feared across the territory, and read to her from the books she loved. Simple acts of service that came 30 years too late. On the 7th day, she handed me a letter, addressed in a hand I recognized immediately. Thomas Mercer's elegant script, the paper yellowed with age. Read it, she instructed. After I'm gone, not before. I promised, tucking it into my vest pocket, where it burned like a brand against my chest. She died 3 days later, slipping away while I dozed in the chair beside her bed. One moment breathing, the next still as stone. I didn't weep. Men like me had forgotten how. The town buried her with honors. The schoolhouse closed for the day. Children placed wildflowers on her grave. I stood apart from the mourners, this woman's self-appointed protector who had ultimately failed to shield her from death's inevitable claim. That night, alone in my sparse quarters, I opened Mercer's letter with hands that refused to remain steady. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I have kept my promise and returned to offer you passage from this place. I pray that the years have not dimmed your spirit nor your resolve. San Francisco is everything I described and more. The school flourishes, and there remains a place for you here, not just in the library I've established, but in my heart, which has remained constant despite our separation. I understand if time or circumstance has altered your feelings, but know that I have never stopped believing that someday you might choose freedom over familiar chains. With eternal devotion, Thomas. The letter was dated just 3 months prior. He had kept his promise, had intended to return for her after all these years, and she had kept the letter, perhaps planning her escape from Widow's Creek at last. An escape death had denied her, an escape I would have tried to prevent, even after all this time. That night I tracked down a young outlaw who'd been terrorizing homesteads north of town, found him sleeping in a camp among the pines. He drew when confronted, but his shot went wide. Mine didn't. As he lay dying, eyes wide with recognition of who had found him, I confessed a truth I'd never spoken aloud. I'm no instrument of justice, boy. Never was. Remember that when you reach the other side. Tell them the adjudicator was just a lovesick fool with a gun. He died confused, my words meaningless to him, but saying them aloud broke something loose inside me. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office and removed the star from my chest for the final time. 2 days later, as I rode the trail toward California, a bullet from an unknown gun found its mark between my shoulders. Poetic justice, perhaps, for a man who'd created so many orphans and widows in his time. They brought me to this doctor's office in a town whose name I never bothered to learn. The candle gutters now, nearly spent. My hand cramps around the pen, but I need to finish this confession before the darkness takes me. I wonder sometimes if she watches from whatever lies beyond, if she sees the truth I've finally embraced after a lifetime of lies. Does she still pity me, I wonder? Or has that, too, faded like everything else? They say when a man dies, his whole life flashes before his eyes. Mine has been scrolling through my mind for days now, frame by bloody frame. Not the gunfights or the manhunts or the newspaper stories. Those were never the real story anyway. No, what I see are the moments I watched her from across the street, the times I mistook politeness for possibility, the slow poison of hope that I allowed to corrupt every good instinct I might have possessed. I see the faces of men I killed not for justice, but for jealousy. Men whose only crime was earning a smile I coveted. I see the town that feared and respected me, never knowing their fearsome protector was just a man twisted by wanting what he couldn't have. I see Eleanor most of all, not as the young widow in the wheat-colored dress, but as she was at the end, dignified despite her frailty, clear-eyed about who and what I was, yet somehow still capable of speaking to the human being beneath the legend. "Perhaps there's hope for your soul yet," she'd said. "I don't know about that. Never put much stock in souls or salvation. But there's a kind of peace in finally admitting the truth, even if no one but this paper will ever hear it." The adjudicator was a myth built on a foundation of obsession. Every act of so-called justice was just another attempt to be worthy of a woman who saw through me from the very beginning. The irony doesn't escape me. I spent 30 years trying to prove myself to her, only to finally earn a measure of her respect when I admitted I'd been living a lie. The pain is getting worse now. Doc says the bullets shifted, moving closer to my heart with each passing hour. Fitting, I suppose. I lived by the gun. It's only right I should die by it. I can hear the nurse coming down the hall to check on me. She'll find these pages, maybe read them before burning them in the stove. Maybe not. Doesn't much matter now. If by some chance these words find their way to Widow's Creek, to the people who knew the adjudicator, I leave them with this. Question the motives of men who claim to serve justice. Look beneath the badge, beneath the gun, beneath the reputation. Ask what drives them in the dark hours when no one is watching. You might find, as Eleanor did, that the most dangerous men aren't the outlaws who wear their intentions openly, but the heroes whose true motives remain hidden, even from themselves. The candle's almost out. So am I.